Hi, this is Autohaus Hamilton TV, and I'm James, or a reasonable facsimile thereof. In this video, we continue our examination of suspension systems with a look at shock absorbers. Roll titles. In the previous video, I flippantly said that springs were shock absorbers because they absorbed the shocks caused by imperfections in road surfaces. So what does that make shock absorbers then? Shock absorbers have the task of damping or dampening the resultant bounciness and maintaining body control. Their job is to reduce the oscillations introduced by the springs and, as a result, improve body control. Shock absorbers work by introducing friction into the suspension system. That friction ends up as heat, and heat, as we shall see, is the enemy of shock absorber design. The earliest spring designs used leaf springs, which are self-dampening or self-damping. Friction between the leaves acts as a rudimentary shock absorber. But for greater control, you need more damping. And to achieve that, we need to add shock absorbers. One of the early shock designs is the Hartford friction disc shock absorber. They were simple in design, with a stack of wooden or asbestos discs between metal plates and easily adjusted. But they had three main design flaws. The first was that they offered a constant rate of damping. That's a drawback because a perfect shock absorber provides increased damping with increased suspension forces. They also suffer from stiction. And yes, it is a real word. Stiction refers to the initial force required to get two parts moving relative to each other. The third issue is that the design leads to heat buildup, which changes the performance of the shock absorber. The earliest designs used wooden discs, which had their own exciting problems with excessive heat buildup. Later versions used asbestos, better for dealing with heat, but asbestos has other issues. Hartford-type shock absorbers were considered obsolete by the end of the Second World War, when they were replaced by lever-arm shock absorbers. Lever-arm shock absorbers used a lever connected to either a rotary vane or a paddle within an oil-filled body. One of the big advantages of lever-arm shock absorbers over the disc type was that it was now possible to have different bump and rebound dampening. By the 1960s, lever-arm shock absorbers had in turn given way to telescopic shock absorber designs, which are what we continue to use with some fairly significant design changes. Telescopic shock absorbers were better able to deal with heat. They have a larger volume of oil compared to lever-arm units, which allows them to absorb more heat without degradation of their performance, and they also have a higher surface area relative to their volume, which allows for better heat dissipation. That's important because hot oil is less viscous. It's thinner than cool oil. Under heavy use with heat buildup, shocks become less effective. Telescopic shocks work by pushing a valved piston through oil. The valving can be changed to provide more or less resistance. Internally, the shock absorber is pressurized. That pressure prevents the oil from turning to foam as a result of cavitation in the oil. Over time, the pressure escapes and the shock absorber loses its efficiency. This is what causes shock absorbers to wear out and need replacement. Earlier, I mentioned that shocks could be adjustable. The first adjustment is bump. A shock can be adjusted to be more or less firm in response to a bump. This is one-way adjustability. The next parameter which may be adjustable is rebound, which controls how quickly the shock allows the spring to return to its initial position. With adjustable bump and rebound, we now have a two-way adjustable shock. That's two ways we can get things wrong. For most applications, that gives us sufficient options. Adjustability is only of use when combined with the knowledge required to achieve better handling. But wait, there's more. It's also possible to have different bump and rebound characteristics for fast and slow bump and rebound. And that brings us into the realm of four-way adjustability, Now we can really screw things up. To make use of four-way adjustability, you need data to allow you to analyze how the car's suspension is behaving under use, and knowledge of how you want to change that behavior to improve handling. For most people in most driving situations, the distinction is harder or softer. And that sentence has a very different meaning without the addition of the word driving. If your preference is for a more comfortable drive, you might prefer softer shocks, which comes at the cost of giving up control. Or you could opt for a firmer ride with better control, but that comes at the cost of a firmer ride, which may not always be what you want. Porsche's electronically adjustable suspension system, known by the acronym PASM, which stands for Porsche Active Suspension Management, uses electronically managed valves within the shocks to allow the driver to change the shock settings on the go. At the press of a switch, a disc moves inside the body of the shock to change the valving. Sport mode firms things up, and normal mode provides a more comfortable ride. Another way to achieve a similar result is by altering the viscosity of the fluid inside the shock. Enter magnetorheological fluid. Magnetorheological fluid is controlled by an electromagnet, which causes the fluid to become more or less viscous as desired. This system is used by Audi, Ferrari, and Ford, among others, and is the mirror image of Porsche's system. PASM changes the stiffness of the shock by changing the valving on the fly. Magnetorheological shocks leave the valving unchanged, but change the viscosity of the fluid in the shock absorber. As always, thank you very much for watching. In this video, we continue our examination of, no we don't, we start again, because we thought we had our spectacles on.